Welcome to Driver's Therapy. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the ticking that comes usually from a Porsche 981. There's a couple of other years of Porsches that people have mentioned they have this, but I saw that it was prevalent in this year, this model, and I think I figured out. All right, so essentially, long story short, it's an exhaust issue. I would say if we put a percentage on it, I would say it's about 90% exhaust with a 10% possible engine issue. And the reason why I say that is I spent a lot of time researching, pulling up data, looking at people's posts, and just really diving into the topic. And I only found really one person who the ticking turned out to be an engine rebuild, but the rest of them were completely exhaust issues. There were exhaust issues from the header bolts all the way to the exhaust flange. And so essentially what I did is I put the car up, I looked around, and I originally thought it was going to be in the header, but when I looked at the header, I went ahead and I bought the proper sockets, and I checked all the bolts. None of them were missing, all of them were torqued correctly. I also made sure that when I did check them that I followed the procedure, because there's a I believe 1 to 9 or 1 to 8 procedure that you have to make sure that you do. None of the bolts were loose, but when I went ahead and panned over with my flashlight, I found the exhaust flange and I saw some black soot around it, and right there where they made up the exhaust pipe to the header itself. Immediately, just from experience, I knew that that was an exhaust issue, so I started to do more research. Essentially, this isn't a closed and shut case. This is actually one of those things that somebody said a 5-minute job turns to 4 days. And the reason why is that one of the biggest issues with the exhaust gasket really isn't the gasket, it's the bolt itself. The hardware not only rusts, but it disintegrates. There's a video on YouTube where a guy literally spent days trying to replace an exhaust because he had to drill out these bolts, and they're a pain in the butt. So what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be replacing or attempting to replace this gasket, which mine has failed. So the first thing you want to do is you want to put some WD-40 or PB Blaster on the studs. This is going to help out. You want to leave this on there for about 10 minutes. You're going to also want to apply some of this on the clamps in the back that hold up the exhaust. And yeah, just put a little bit on there and let that sit there for about 10 minutes. Next, you're going to go ahead and you're going to loosen up the clamp that holds the exhaust via the bracket. It's a 15mm socket and shouldn't be on there too tight. I believe it's 13 foot-pounds or 11 foot-pounds. I'll put this up here in a bit when we go back to put it on there. Now you're going to have to do this on both sides. On both sides of the exhaust, there's going to be identical clamps. And what these clamps do is they hold the exhaust to the bracket. So essentially the exhaust is sitting on this bracket and the clamps hold it on there. And what we're doing is we're loosening these clamps, and you want to loosen them enough where you could pretty much move them over that bracket. And what that's going to do is going to give you clearance so you can gain access to the gasket at the exhaust flange where the header / catalytic converter meet. And now heading back to the flange where the catalytic converter / headers and exhaust meet. Using a 12mm socket and a swivel, you're going to go ahead and remove the nuts. I alternated between each side, but it was pretty straightforward. And as long as you don't have any problem with those studs, you're good to go. At this point in time, I am removing the nuts from the flange, inspecting the studs, and also cleaning up the WD-40 or PB Blaster that I put on there to remove those nuts. Also, it's a good time to just look at the surrounding area, the mating surfaces, and just also clean up the area where the leak was at. So there's going to be that black stuff. I believe it's called soot or something like that. Just want to clean that up so in case you ever looking for another exhaust leak, you might not mistake your previous one for a new one. Now, we didn't film the removal of the exhaust gasket, and the reason why is my hand was in the way. But essentially what I use is I use a flathead and I pried the exhaust from the catalytic converter. And I was able to slip out the thin metallic gasket. As you could tell, they look different. You can see on one side there was definitely some evidence of a leak there. So there was a question about this gasket. Both sides are not the same. They're not symmetrical. So I wanted to see if it was directional. I reached out to a couple people. One reputable shop got back to me and said that this side actually goes to the rear. So that is how I did it. So there's a couple of tips you want to know when installing the gasket. It is metal and metallic, so you don't want to bend it or add a crease in it just because that might allow a leak. Also, we were talking about the direction, but what I did is using a flathead is I went ahead and put the gasket over the studs and I gently pried the exhaust where I could slide in the other part of the gasket through the stud. At this point in time, I just want to make sure that they're over the studs, they're aligned correctly, so when we go ahead and mate up that exhaust, it's going to be a clean and correct installation. So we did get fortunate enough not to have any issues with the studs, but in order to prevent any of that in the future, I'm going to go ahead and apply some anti-seize, some copper anti-seize. It's what's recommended, and I'm just going to go ahead and put it on the stud itself. And also when a nut goes in there, I feel like it's going to get coated as well. At this point, we're going to go ahead and tighten down the nuts, and I'm going to be using the alternate methods to make sure that I clamp that flange on there correctly. And we're going to torque them down to 17 foot-pounds torque as per the manual. So what I did first is I tightened up the flange that goes to the header / catalytic converter. That's the one you want to do first, and then go to the back where the clamps are that holds up the exhaust. And at that point in time, we're going to go ahead and tighten those up as well. And we're going to tighten those down using a 15mm and torque them down to 11 foot-pounds as per the manufacturer's specification. So we're finishing up here, and what you want to do is you just want to make sure that everything's tightened down. Double check your work, make sure there's no WD-40 or PB Blaster left on the engine or any of the body parts, and just make sure all the tools and everything are cleaned up, and you're ready to inspect and make sure you have a good and leak-free exhaust. An additional tip, if for some reason you still have an exhaust leak from that location, I did read that you could add some copper gasket maker, and you want to get the high temp one, and apparently that will pretty much solve the issue in case there's some imperfections that the OEM gasket cannot overcome. Okay, so like I was talking before, we could have ran into issues, but we got super lucky. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm like looking around because, you know, just like those barn cats or road cats, like those car gremlins could just pop out of nowhere, because this job went really well. Like we were able to replace the gasket, torque it down, apply anti-seize, and just, you know, hopefully fixed our ticking / cart in the bicycle wheel sound. But, so yeah, so we're good to go. Well, if you have any questions or if you have similar issues or anything like that, if you're gonna do this, you can ask me and I'll do anything I can to help you out. Again, we welcome you to subscribe, also punch that like button, and we also thank you for watching the video. And you guys stay safe, and we'll see you soon.